So Chris Chibnall's third and final series as showrunner on Doctor Who is upon us, and I've made it pretty clear that I've not been the biggest fan of the era so far. I'm definitely interested in doing a retrospective on it once we've had Flux and the subsequent specials. Before that, I wanted to make a little video tying into Series 13, but I'm honestly a bit burnt out on negativity. Being mean about things is perfectly fine, despite what some people will tell you, as long as you're not too mean to the people who do like it. But on a personal level, I find it's healthy to be positive about things sometimes. It reminds me why I'm a fan, and it's a lot less draining. So I thought I'd try something new and be nice about Chris Chibnall's era. I decided I'd make a numbered list of 5 things I like, and then I panicked when I couldn't think of that many things. But I've managed now. I'll try and keep snark to a minimum, but I doubt I'll manage to avoid it entirely. So you can expect a few backhanded compliments. So let's get started with number 5, which is, I like the fact that it's bold. Now this is a point I almost can't believe I've put in, and it's pretty backhanded, so I've put it first. Because how can this era that I have often accused of being mostly bland and inoffensive ever be described as having done anything bold? But it's in a bit of a bizarre paradoxical state, because I think it's played a lot of things frustratingly safe, but at the same time I do have to applaud the boldness of some of these decisions. I guess the obvious example here is making the Doctor a woman. I've seen people argue that by 2017 this wasn't a particularly groundbreaking thing to do. It was less about it being a shock twist that no one expected, and more just an inevitable matter of when. But I think the response to it and the ongoing discussion surrounding the 13th Doctor proves that this was still something that was going to cause a stir, which means even more so that it was something that needed to happen. But there have also been flashes of bold choices in the stories themselves. I would like to clarify that there is a definite difference between boldness and goodness, but I do always appreciate when showrunners, writers, and just creative people in general are able to do the weird things they want to do, rather than being beholden to fan expectations and fear of pissing people off. I think the timeless child twist was a total misfire. It completely misunderstands the appeal of the Doctor and the show itself. I've said before how stupid I find it, but at the same time, you have to admit that it's a pretty massive thing to do. The mad lad Chris Chibnall changed the Doctor's species, rewrote her past, developed an entirely new origin for the Time Lords that puts Doctor Who right at the centre as this secret chosen one. Was it a good thing to do? No. But was it a creative and interesting thing to do? Also no. But was it a bold thing to do? Undeniably. And I can respect that he had the guts to do the weird game-changing shit he wanted to do to the character and the show. But the bold story decisions aren't all bad, or at least I don't think they're all bad. It Takes You Away is a great episode that builds up this sentient universe character over the course of the whole story, exploring its devastating potential and mystifying its existence. Then, in the climax of the episode, the Doctor steps through to finally meet it, and it's taken the form of a little frog who speaks with the voice of Ryan's Nan. I know some people saw this moment as the show crossing some point of no return for quality, an insult to all those watching, but honestly, I have no choice but to stand this frog on a chair. And more importantly, the fact the show wasn't afraid to do it. Number 4, the specials. The Chibnall era has had 2 specials, and you may be surprised to find out that I actually quite like both of them, and I'd like to briefly dive into why. See, you thought I wasn't going to say it this time. I do really miss the Christmas specials. I did a video last year about how much I love most of them, and it is frustrating that Moffat went through all that trouble to keep the Christmas Day slot, just for Chibnall to chuck it aside for the sake of New Year's. So the 2 specials he has released have been immediately robbed of that festive Doctor Who magic. Series 11 era wanted grounded stakes, believable characters, and an element of found family. And I personally think the best way to tie that up would have been with a lovely Christmas dinner. But I think what we got instead did a pretty good job. Everything I like about Resolution can be summed up by what I like about its name. It feels like the true finale of Series 11. A pretty nice resolution for all of the threads that had developed, or not really developed, over the course of the last 10 episodes. The stuff with Graham, Ryan, and Ryan's dad is all very nice. I think it probably should have been the last episode for those characters because I think it's the last time they had anything real to do, but that's not really the fault of this episode specifically. And the Doctor gets some nice moments standing up for her friend. It's obviously also called Resolution because it's a New Year's story with a fitting focus on reflection and preparations for new beginnings. In some ways, it feels a lot more Series 12 than Series 11, bringing back the old villain, the higher stakes, and memorability, and I think it handles the seasonal theme better than some Christmas specials handle Christmas. It also must be said that it's a multicultural world and a multicultural country, and not everyone celebrates Christmas, so a New Year's story is a bit more inclusive, and I appreciate that. The last reason I like it is because of the most clever thing the title does. We've had so many of the Daleks stories that this one doesn't feel the need to say it. It leaves it as an unspoken inference, and I think it's a relatively successful Dalek story. Not because it stands up against all those army people. We've always known that they could do that. That's literally their thing. Still, people point to it and say, finally, the Daleks are a threat again. But I think the way the rest of the story treats the lone Dalek makes makes it feel pretty effective. I like the opening story about this being an enemy of legend, something considered so dangerous that the individual parts need to be separated and guarded for generations. It shows the Dalek as an intelligent and resourceful villain outside of their armor, with some fun Venom stuff. And I think the presence of a Dalek allows Jodie to come into her own a bit more when she faces it. It's not a perfect story, there are definitely messy elements, bad jokes, Yaz does nothing, but there's also a lot to like about it, and I'm happy that it exists. The same goes for Revolution of the Daleks. A lot of the points are exactly the same, only more extreme. I'd like to have a deeper look at this one because there is so much going on, and not all of it is good. But I don't know if it was just because my expectations were so low after Timeless Children or what, but I managed to really enjoy myself when I watched this episode. It may be the fact that it's 70 minutes long and I choose to only remember the good stuff, so I've got a really tight 45-minute version of this existing in my head. But I think it's fun. This time it's Graham who does nothing, until his exit, which I actually think is handled quite well, and Ryan doesn't do much either until his conversation with the Doctor, which I mentioned in my video about why the fan doesn't work as a rare example of a really good scene. But I think it's a good Yaz story, and 13 being kind of miserable in the wake of the Timeless Child twists adds a new layer to the character, not just because it's pretty relatable to be left disappointed by the finale, but because she's got an extra layer of depth beyond her usual chirpiness. I think she may be at her best in this special, to be honest. I was really pleasantly surprised by both of these stories in general. This has gone on longer than I was expecting. I apologise for the analytical detour in this supposedly simple numbered list, but I wrote down I like the New Year's specials in my notes planning this video and then realised it was actually going to take more justification than the rest of my points. I hope you get what I mean now, even if you think I'm crazy for it. Number 3, there's a whole lot of history. I guess my next point is a bit like my first, as it's also about the decisions that have informed the overall directions of the stories. Series 11 and 12 have done a pretty good job delivering on one of Doctor Who's original goals, using time travel stories as a way of teaching the audience about the past. That was a big part of the earlier series, but the focus was kind of phased out as the show evolved. Obviously, episodes set in the past never went away, but it seems like telling actual informative historical stories is way more at the forefront of Chris Chibnall's mission statement than it was for Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat. A lot of the time in those eras, historical figures appeared almost incidentally in pretty standard stories about aliens. There were some notable exceptions, but for a lot of them, the focus was away from their actual lives and stories. But the equivalent episodes in the Chris Chibnall era have actually taught us a fair amount about specific historical periods, like the ones depicted in Rosa and Demons of the Punjab, and we've also been shown the history and accomplishments of people like Rosa Parks, King James I, Nikola Tesla, Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, Ada Lovelace, and Noor Inayat Khan. Most of the time, the narrative, settings, and threats of the episode are built around these specific people, and even when they're not the absolute focus of the story, the scripts are always interested in shining a light on what made them interesting or important, often because the Doctor herself is giving us exposition through fangirling, which a lot of people find irritating but I think is pretty endearing. None of these episodes are perfect, but I really like most of them. Ada is a highlight of Spyfall and really should have become a proper companion. Rosa could have been a lot better, but it's a commendable effort to teach the British public more on a topic we're dangerously uneducated about. Haunting of Villa Diodati is superb all round, and Alan Cumming as King James is probably the show's best guest star. I'm so glad that this era fleshed out the historical element of the show's identity, and I'd love to see future eras give this level of attention to the past. Number 2, the title sequence. This is probably the one that I can be most unapologetically positive about. I just love it. In a number of episodes in these series, everything starts to go downhill as soon as the opening credits end. See, even now I can't help but be snarky, but it's mostly just a testament to how much I love this thing. Most of the New Who title sequences have been modernizations of the classic TARDIS flying through the time vortex visual, using top-of-the-line CGI to make it look less like just a little tube. But what's so special about this one is that it's a modernization of the original black and white intros, representing the uncertain adventure into mystery with vague and undefined lights, shapes, and then in the early 70s, colours. I would have said it was something that was impossible to recreate with precise CGI without losing the sense of mystery that gave the original its whole appeal. But luckily the sequence was created by one of the most talented people in the business. Ben Pickles used to run a YouTube channel called John Smith VFX, designing and bringing to life a number of superb visual concepts for Doctor Who. And now he's working on the show officially, and it's all the better for it. It just looks so cool. The warping of space and time actually feels alive, and it perfectly captures the feeling of the sequences of those first 3 Doctors. Sometimes it even creates the illusion of a typical linear vortex too, which is fun because it leans into the idea that time isn't just a straight line, it just seems like one. This is really the best visual representation of a big ball of wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff that the show has ever done. I recently experienced it in VR and it was pretty breathtaking. The VFX of this era are pretty great in general. The time vortex we get in the show itself feels like an extension of this opening concept, and it's probably the best it's ever looked. But an opening sequence is made up of 2 parts, the visuals and the music, critic. Sagan Akinola has spoken about how inspired he was by the original work of Delia Derbyshire and the Radiophonic Workshop, and it shows. This is the theme that feels closest to the original, while remaining fresh and creative. I've enjoyed his contributions to the show a lot. I think the way his music is used within the episodes themselves could be better, but the actual compositions are really nice, especially his theme for the Doctor. So I guess this title sequence point is also lumping in the VFX and the music of this era as a whole, because I'm actually quite a big fan of all of it. And what kind of Watch Mojo ripoff would this be if I didn't have an honourable mention before revealing my number one pick? I'd like to briefly say that a lot of the alien redesigns from this era have been really good. The Daleks, the Cybermen, and the Sontarans look delightful. There's not much else to add, but I just think they're neat. Number 1, I like the Doctor. My final point is probably the most important, because if this era has done nothing else, it has established an incarnation of the Doctor who is incredibly memorable, groundbreaking, and immediately put to rest all the speculation that only men could play the role. Casting an actor who brought the gravitas, charisma, and humour to command every scene she was in, rivaling some of the best Doctors in the show's history on that front. I'm talking, of course, about Jo Martin. I've spoken at length about this Doctor. I thought she would be the perfect successor for Jodie back when it seemed like Chibnall was staying on. Now I think the concept of the fugitive Doctor and the timeless child is something that RTD won't even want to touch, nor should he be obligated to. But it does mean that this fantastic and historical casting decision will be wasted on a throwaway supporting character, existing only in service of a surprise reveal. That being said, the reveal itself is superb, and Jo Martin carries the episode from that moment on. I still firmly believe that she could have carried multiple series, but that's sadly something that may never happen. Hopefully Big Finish can pick up some of the pieces that Chris Chibnall has carelessly left on the floor. So yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of this incarnation of the Doctor, and I'm an even bigger fan of what this incarnation of the Doctor could have been, but I don't want this point to be a backhanded attempt to insult Jodie by omission. So let's talk about her for a moment. I don't think she's great. She seems to glide through most episodes as a pretty poorly defined mix of the 10th and 11th Doctors, managing to be harder to take seriously than both of them. She has very few traits beyond that, and I find her exaggerated way of speaking to feel very similar to children's TV, with a few condescending moments that give her an unflattering resemblance to a CBeebies presenter. I'm not the first to point that out, but that doesn't make it any less true. However, there are actually some cases where that works. In Time Fracture, the Doctor Who immersive theatre production in London, she speaks to you in the second person, guiding you through the experience with the enthusiasm required to bring an event like that to life. The same can be said for Edge of Time, the VR game, and Edge of Reality, the new console expansion. When she's spouting exposition and holding the hand of the unspeaking protagonist through various environments and situations, she's in her element. In both of these formats, she shines, and I really buy her as the Doctor, which is something I'd love to feel more in the show itself. But that's not to say it never happens in the show itself. She really does have her moments. As I said before, I like how she faces off with the Daleks. I like how she brings history to life. I like the energy she brings to episodes that have the potential to be dangerously dull. And the few moments of darkness that she's shown in standing up to bad people or in the wake of the timeless child reveal have been interesting. And as I said, this is something that the Chris Chibnall era deserves credit for. Regardless of whether it was overdue or not, a female Doctor was something that needed to happen. The 13th Doctor may not be for me, but I'm not sure that matters. If there are young girls or any young people who watch Doctor Who and now have this great female role model to look up to and learn from, then the show has done its job. And Jodie Whittaker herself has been a fantastic ambassador for the show through this time. In the promotion and in meeting the fans, she's been a delight, with an infectious passion for the series and her work on it, even when she's not allowed to actually talk about many specific details. On that level, we couldn't have asked for a better Doctor. It'll be interesting to see how involved she is in the show going forward. When it comes to conventions, Big Finish, anniversary specials, I'd like her to get a chance to do those last two, just to see her written by different writers. My hopes for Jodie's last series and her specials is that she goes out with a bang, that the strongest aspects of her characterization are brought to the forefront, and that her time as the Doctor has an undeniably spectacular conclusion. I'll be going in with an open mind, even if my expectations aren't astronomical. There is nothing I'd love more than to be pleasantly surprised. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, even if you don't necessarily agree with me about everything. If you do agree, give this video a thumbs up, and if you disagree, also give this video a thumbs up. I've honestly had a lot of fun being nice for a change, although I don't think I'll be making a habit out of it for this era because I've pretty much exhausted all my positivity on that. But I'll have to keep in mind how refreshing it is in general. Let me know your favourite things about the Chris Chibnall era in the comments, and subscribe to my channel if you're new. I've recently become a lot busier with university, so I'll only be uploading once every 4 weeks, but I also have a podcast called Diving Into Why, and the next episode of that will feature a discussion of the start of Doctor Who Flux, so you can check that out. Links are in the description. I'll also be tweeting about it and all kinds of things, so follow me there. There's a link to that in my description as well, along with all my other socials and my Patreon and my Discord, and I think that's it. I'll see you relatively soon. Love you lots.